I was standing in a yellow sundress at the edge of a backyard full of string lights and laughter, holding a glass of lemonade I never drank, when I watched the man I had starved myself for slide a ring onto the hand of my best friend. My name is Denise, and this is the day my entire life broke in half in front of 40 people who all knew my name but pretended, in that moment, that they didn't. Nobody warned me. Nobody pulled me aside. I found out the way you find out your house is on fire, by smelling smoke after it's already too late to save anything. But to understand how I ended up standing in that backyard with my heart in my throat, you need to know everything I gave up to get him there in the first place, because none of this happened overnight, and none of it happened the way anyone would expect. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I met Michael on a Tuesday in October, outside a laundromat in a small town in Ohio, where he was folding a single threadbare shirt like it was the only one he owned, which, as it turned out, it was. He had a way of talking about the future like he could already see it, like the rest of us were just standing in a present he had already left behind. I was 22, working 2 jobs, and I had a savings account with exactly $412 in it. Money I had been setting aside for a car that actually started in the winter. Within 3 months, that money belonged to Michael's tuition fund. I told myself it was an investment. I told myself a man with that much fire in his eyes was worth betting on. I did not yet understand that some bets are designed, from the very beginning, to never pay the person who placed them. The sacrifices started small enough that I barely noticed them stacking up. I skipped lunch so I could cover his books. I picked up weekend shifts at a diner so he could afford the bus fare to his night classes. I remember one winter where I wore the same coat for 2 years straight because the money for a new one had quietly become his rent instead. He always thanked me the same way, holding my face in both his hands and telling me that one day, when he had everything, I would have it too. I believed him completely, the way you believe a song you've heard so many times you stop noticing the words. It would take years before I understood that promises repeated often enough start to feel like proof, even when they are not. The first warning sign came from a woman named Carol, who worked the register next to mine at the diner, a woman twice my age who had buried 2 husbands and trusted almost no one. She watched me hand over my tip money one night to help Michael cover an exam fee, and she said something I brushed off completely. She said, "Watch closely who claps the loudest at his graduation, because the ones clapping the loudest are sometimes the ones who have already decided what they're going to take from him once he's worth taking from." I laughed it off as the bitterness of a woman who had been burned too many times. I did not yet know that some people see clearly precisely because they have already been where you are standing. My best friend at the time was a woman named Jennifer, someone I had known since the 7th grade, someone who had sat with me in hospital waiting rooms and helped me move apartments 3 separate times without ever once complaining. When Michael and I were at our lowest, broke and exhausted and barely speaking some nights from sheer fatigue, Jennifer was the one who showed up at my door with groceries she pretended she happened to have extra of. She sat with me on the floor of my kitchen and told me I deserved better than living on rice and eggs. And for a moment, I actually believed she meant that I deserved better than the sacrifice itself. Not that she had already begun imagining herself in my place. That single act of kindness is the reason it took me so long to see what was happening, because it is much harder to suspect someone who has already proven, even once, that they can be gentle with you. But what I did not know was that somewhere in those same months, while I was working doubles to keep Michael afloat, Jennifer had started attending the same study sessions he held at the campus library on Thursday nights. Sessions I never had time to attend myself because I was always at work. At first it was nothing, a ride here, a borrowed textbook there, the kind of small overlaps that happen naturally between 2 people who already know each other through me. I want you to remember that detail, because it matters later. Nothing about it looked like betrayal in the moment. It looked like convenience. It looked like 2 people who cared about me finding it easier to coordinate their care for me without my involvement. I had no reason yet to feel the small unease that was already living quietly in my chest. Michael graduated on a bright Saturday in May, and I sat in the 3rd row of that auditorium wearing a dress I had sewn a button back on it twice because I could not afford a new one. When his name was called, I screamed loud enough that my throat hurt for 2 days afterward. He found me after the ceremony, lifted me off the ground, and told me, in front of his entire family, that none of it would have been possible without me. I remember thinking, in that exact moment, that every missed meal and every double shift had finally been worth something. I want you to hold on to that feeling with me, because I am going to ask you to remember exactly how certain I was, how complete that joy felt, right before everything I believed about my life began quietly unraveling underneath me without my permission. The job offer came 2 weeks later, a position at an engineering firm 2 hours away, the kind of opportunity that changes a person's entire trajectory overnight. Michael moved within the month, and I stayed behind to finish out my lease and save enough to follow him properly. At first he called every single night, then every other night. Then the calls became texts, short and rushed, always ending with some version of work has been a lot lately. I told myself this was simply what growth looked like, that a man building a new life needed time to settle before he could fully bring someone else into it. I did not yet understand that distance does not create change in a person, it only reveals the change that has already been sitting there, waiting for enough space to finally show itself. It was Jennifer who told me, gently, that she had decided to take a job near Michael's new city, something about better opportunities in that market, something that sounded reasonable enough on its own that I had no grounds to question it. She called me every week to update me on how he was doing, how tired he seemed, how much he talked about missing home, and I remember feeling grateful that I had someone there keeping an eye on him for me, someone I trusted enough to be my eyes in a city I could not yet afford to live in. I did not know that the woman reassuring me on the phone every Sunday night was the same woman who had begun spending nearly every evening in his apartment, cooking him dinner, listening to him complain about the pressure of his new position, becoming, slowly, and without my knowledge, the version of comfort I used to be. The invitation came in an envelope addressed only to me, no return address, just a date, a time, and an address 2 hours from my apartment. I assumed it was a work celebration for Michael, something his new company was hosting, and I spent an entire week's tips on the yellow sundress I wore that day because I wanted to look like the kind of woman who belonged at his side in his new life. I drove those 2 hours with the windows down, practicing in my head how I would greet his new coworkers, rehearsing a version of myself that felt confident and put together. I had no idea that I was driving directly toward the moment that would explain every strange silence, every shortened phone call, every small detail I had quietly chosen not to examine too closely over the past several months. When I arrived, the backyard